today we're going to discuss about whether you can learn a language without living in a country where this language is spoken. I think this question is really popular among language learners, and it has also caused a limiting belief because many people think that they can't become fluent in their target language, or at least they can't sound natural unless they spend some time in a country where the language is spoken, or they put off their language learning because one day they will eventually move to that country, and thanks to exposure, everything is going to be 10 times easier, right? So in this video, we're going to explore this question. Well, my short answer is yes, you can definitely learn a language without moving abroad. But I will talk more in detail based on my own experiences, observations. To start with, I think we can't deny that living abroad has its own advantages. Because personally, I've been living in Italy for a while now, and my Italian is definitely better than when I first got here. But there are some remarks to make here because this is not the only time in my life when my Italian improved. And another point is, what really improved my Italian is not ordering my coffee in Italian every day, but rather attending my university classes and studying my degree in Italian. So that makes a difference. Living abroad is certainly helpful to some extent, but it's not some kind of magic tool that's going to shift everything, because in most of the cases you have to rely on daily interactions, which are always about the same thing. You are either going to order something, or you're going to say that you will pay with the card, or you say that you don't need any kind of bag, right? Is this really the idea of fluent that you are imagining, contemplating? Before following with my points, I want to introduce you to italki if you want to work on your speaking skills in a more structured way, or if you want to go beyond daily conversations and become more fluent. I think many of you are already familiar with italki, but if not, it's a language learning platform where you can take one-on-one classes with native teachers in more than 150 languages. So the idea is helping you with your speaking abilities with real-time feedback and experienced native teachers. And of course, each class is adapted to your level and your specific needs. If you want to prepare for a job interview, or if you just want to prepare for an exam, if you just want to improve your level, or even if you want to become better in daily interactions, if you just move to a country, you can find everything that you need.
In Italia questo concetto è un po' esistente nonostante il fatto che sono allora in Nord Italia, adesso a Milano. Questo approccio lo apprezzo un po', però anche a volte mi manca avere i suoi frontiere personali, si dice?
Le proprie barriere, le proprie
Confine
limitazioni
oppure...
personali.
Sì, sì.
Sì, o i limiti anche forse.
And the best part is you pay per class, so there is absolutely no commitment if you feel like you can just take a class. And working with a native teacher, I think it helps you to recognize your mistakes in real time, like whether you make a pronunciation mistake or whatever you said wasn't just quite natural or quite correct, or if there's a better alternative. It's important to realize all those things at the earlier stage. So if you like to work on your speaking abilities, I think it's a great opportunity. And I have a discount code here for you on the screen. When you use this, you get $5 when you buy your first $10 of credits, and it works for the first 50 people. So if that was something you've been thinking about, I think now it's a good time to try, and definitely make sure that you check the description of this video. First of all, living in a country where your target language is spoken implies that you are under constant exposure. Like, whether you want it or not, you will hear and see this language everywhere. So one could say that it's actually one of the best environments and conditions to acquire a language, maybe. At some point you will probably realize that the real life in that country isn't quite like in the textbooks. So they have their own ways of expressing, their own slangs and words that you've probably never heard, or words that you will learn only when people explain it to you, because here dialects also play a crucial role. Maybe you learn something entirely different, you learn something more standard, but you move to a particular city and now they are speaking in a completely different way. So I think it's one of the best ways to really experience a language. And if you were already conversational before moving to a country, living abroad forces you to learn more, because you will constantly have to express new things, sometimes define something, and your vocabulary won't always be enough. For example, think about the language that you're learning. Do you know what this is called? I didn't know what this was called in Italian until last year. Yeah, pretty normal, I would say. Or this. So this is a lens case, and recently I lost mine, and I was like, okay, I have to go to optician and ask for this. But what is the exact Italian word for this? So I just looked up in dictionary. Dictionary says it's a portalenti. I searched for portalenti on Google to see if this was really sold as portalenti, so if the translation was correct. And I was like, yeah, this seems to be a portalenti. Then I went to the optician and I asked for a portalenti, and he said, intendi la scatolina? So you mean the little box? So if I didn't live in Italy, I would never know what this was called in Italian, because right now, for example, I don't know what's this called in German, okay? Because I don't need it. I need this only in Italian. And I wouldn't think of calling this a little box if he didn't use that term to me. So definitely living abroad has its own perks. And it's also really significant when it comes to culture, because when I went to Russia, the thing that absolutely shocked me was whenever you want to call a waiter, you don't just say извините, like you could say this, it's not forbidden, but people mostly say like девушка, like girl, even worse. Молодой человек. What? Like my Turkish mind just cannot. Sorry.
Молодой человек. Może
So now you may be saying, okay, you talk about how everything is perfect, how you magically learn super specific stuff. Correct. But you know what? To get access to this information, you don't have to go to a Russian-speaking country. For example, if you haven't learned Russian and didn't know about this before, now you learned thanks to this video. Or if I consumed more content in Russian before I went to Russia, if I stumbled upon this specific information, or maybe I knew this but I forgot at some point, you could perfectly navigate daily situations. You could sound exactly like a native, no one would suspect that you are a foreigner with perfect language level who's just trying to buy some pastries here. No one would suspect a thing. So managing daily interactions, speaking supernaturally, is an entirely different concept from having an advanced level in a language. If I had to give you an example, when I speak French, a lot of French people tell me that I sound so eloquent, like the way I speak, the way I make the phrases. But I also get criticized for the same thing, because a lot of people are like, the way you speak is quite unnecessary, like no one speaks like this in France. The good thing is I don't live in France and I don't have to adapt myself to daily interactions, so I can maximize my output reflecting everything I know. I know it sounds super cool when someone says, oh, I have C2 in this language, but when they speak it, first natives start laughing to that person because it sounds weird. For example, if I just watch a lot of Netflix in French, or if I watch a lot of TikTok in French, then I would just lean to this side. But if I read a book in French, or if I happen to watch a lot of documentaries in French, then I would sound like a C2 learner, which isn't essentially supernatural, or which isn't how French people speak in everyday life. So if your goal is to eventually reach a really high level in your target language, living abroad could help you, but it's not the ultimate solution. Because yes, I live in Italy and I took the Italian C2 exam, but in my daily life I probably speak B1 Italian. And even when sometimes you just use a different word, people think it's weird. And also, you know what? The linguistic experiences you get while living abroad and traveling abroad are entirely different. When you live in a country, you start taking language for granted because eventually you will learn it, right? You will learn it before graduating, you will learn it once you move there, once you start the language course, or once you complete that level, but real life doesn't actually always work like this. For example, here what I have, well, we have some German newspapers, and you may be asking, what am I doing with those, or how did I get this? Well, when I was in Vienna, the newspapers just seemed too interesting, and I was like, I have to grab some German newspapers, and they're annotated. But have I ever tried reading a newspaper in Italian? Now that I'm living in Milan and it's literally accessible everywhere? Here I have a lot of fellow Turkish students, and whenever I ask them about their Italian progress, because believe me, whenever we go to a cafe, we can order in the same Italian level. Here we have no problems. But I ask them if they are now fluent in Italian, and they're like, well, you know, I'm, do you say frequentare in English? Like frequenting, can you frequent a course? I think, yeah. Yeah, I'm participating in my university's course, but it's like a bit intense, and but everyone just has their firm belief in their head that they will be fluent in Italian before graduating, because when you live in a country, this should be the result, right? So at this point, I think it's clear to each one of us that everyone can learn a language as long as they have internet connection without moving to a specific country. But I believe there are also a lot of misconceptions regarding whether it's possible to sound natural in a language or just acquire the slangs or sound similar to a native without living in a country. Because whenever you are beyond some solia, when you're beyond some point, a lot of people start questioning your abilities. For example, I had a lot of comments telling me that probably one of my parents was Russian because of how natural my pronunciation was. Or a lot of people thought that I was a Turkish person living in France. Like, there are a lot of European Turks. So people just thought that that was the case because it's impossible she speaks French like this. It's impossible she has the slangs as well. So there are essentially two ways how people understand you sound natural in a language, and one of them is definitely the pronunciation, like how accent-frei you speak. And the second one is the type of vocabulary you use. Like, are you familiar with the slang? As I said, I don't always use a slang when I speak French, but when I want, I can definitely use the slang. So some people are surprised how I can do this without living in France. So if you're not surrounded by natives who speak the most up-to-date form of that language, you still have social media. I always tell you to create separate TikTok and YouTube accounts in a language that you're learning. But the thing that you'll do here is not just watching any video because it's in your target language. No, you're going to find something that you would still watch if it was in your native language or if it was in English. So the content has to be interesting to you, so you will feel like following it. And when you're watching TikToks, just don't be like, what's this? Okay, understood. Read the comments. Read the comments and discover how people react to certain things. What do native speakers actually say when they like something, when they find something cringe, when they think something is sad? Try to get new words, new expressions, new ways of saying, or even abbreviations, like how do people write in that language? How do they express their thoughts? And another specific tip, if you'd like to give the impression that you're familiar with how a language is really spoken, follow people who are like you. For example, I'm a 20-year-old girl. If I'd like to work on my German, I'm going to follow German girls who are around my age and who make videos on the internet. And when you listen to someone who speaks just like you, who's easier to imitate, who's easier to relate maybe, I think this will have a more meaningful influence on the way you speak and the way you express yourself, the way you articulate your thoughts, or even the way you sound, because it's the closest example that you could find. So if you can't move abroad or travel abroad right now, please don't let this discourage you, and be aware that there are still ways of learning a language, we know this, and ways of sounding natural in a language. And if you're already living in a country where everyone speaks your target language, you better make the best out of the situation. I'm also telling this to myself because I will probably never have the opportunity to focus on my Italian as much as I could do right now, but this is slightly more interesting. I hope my observations were useful to you, and you can follow me on my social media accounts so we stay updated. And please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel right here. See you in another video. Ciao!